What's up, Austin Bonsai Society? Happy 2022. Welcome to January. It is Brandon Baldoff here, former vice president and president of the club, ready to share with you guys some excellent techniques today. Hopefully, you've had a wonderful holiday season and your 2022 is kicked off smashingly well. I've had a great time, visited the Hawkeye Bonsai Land a couple times out in Bastrop, getting things ready out there. Got a few repots snuck in this year already. They're chilling in the greenhouse in order to stay protected from the cold. And tonight we have a really special event for you. We will be exploring this maple. It's a Japanese maple. It's a specialty cultivar called the Arakawa maple. And tonight we're going to go through and explore what the Ebihara technique is. So in essence, we will be undertaking some root work and we will be digging in to apply the Ebihara technique to the root system as we look to repot this maple tonight. Ebihara is essentially the deciduous Kimura of Japan. He's a Japanese bonsai professional who has a nursery just outside of Tokyo, and he specializes in deciduous trees, specifically trident maples and Japanese maples, and he is a wizard when it comes to grafting, root grafting, peg grafting, branch grafting, and this technique here is a technique that's named after him, that he very much proliferated and teaches to many people, and it allows for the practitioner to basically control the direction of the roots as we are trying to cultivate a thick and widespread nabari within the overall design of a maple. So whenever we look at this species, this is an Arakawa. So Arakawa maples, they're very much notable for the bark that they have. So when you take a quick zoom in on some of the features of this maple, you'll see that the bark has a lot of gnarled and big like armor pads on it. So essentially that is one of the highlights of this species, is that they get all this gnarled bark on it versus a lot of the other maples that and cultivars of Japanese maples that are very smooth in their barking presentation. These have lots of gnarly looking features in this region. So they do really well when it comes to this technique because you're allowed to get nice wide spreading nabari that then will have the barking components to it that then transitions into a nice tenigari up into the design of the tree at large. So we will begin tonight by essentially taking this tree out of the plastic container that it's currently in, and we'll be teasing out all of the soil that's in there. There's currently a amount of potting soil and various expanded shale and things of those natures, which is great for developing a tree. But tonight we're going to take it out of that. We're going to put it in some Aoki soil, which is a Japanese pre-blended mix of pumice, black lava, and akadama. So we have some of the Aoki soil that we'll use instead of that, and the Aoki allows for the roots to basically break down and expand and ramify really densely within the akadama that's present in the Aoki soil mix. So we're going to unpot it out of this one. We'll do a little bit of trimming in areas that break off like this. These are just old cut sites that have essentially desiccated and died. So we'll clean the tree up and get it ready for a repot. We'll do some slight balancing of the energy. Deciduous trees in general, as this is a Japanese maple, deciduous trees, they go through the repotting process in the wintertime when they're dormant. All of the energy is stored and built up at the tips, where you basically have these big buds that are swelling. And as we have the tree in a dormant state, we're able to then explore and do root work on it. We're able to cut the roots and remove the roots, and then as the tree wakes up, it'll flush out and push out new buds and new leaves which then allows for the roots to grow after that. So essentially, during the dormant part of the year for deciduous trees is when you want to be doing the root work. So what we'll do is we'll take it out of here after we trim it down. We'll look at some of the roots. We'll do some root trimming, and then we'll basically put this tree on a board, and we'll drill the bottom of the board and the tree together so there's a strong adherence of the wood to the bottom of the tree, and that'll force all the roots to grow laterally. We'll take some very small nails and a hammer, and we'll basically tease the roots and put them into positions where we want them to go, where there's an even distribution of the roots across the nabare that we're looking to design and create. And then from there, with the board being underneath, all of those roots that are growing laterally will continue to push out and then grow up, which will then start teasing above the soil line, hence giving that bulbous sort of elephant foot looking style that you see in Japan. After that, we'll take the board and the tree that are bound together with all the roots nicely distributed with nails, and we will then put that into a bonsai pot, and that will be using the nice soil that we're talking about. So as you see the extra pieces get cut back, we'll start seeing new buds push out of these different areas. As an example, there's a small bud right in this region that could grow and become a new apex for this entire tree, depending on whoever is able to continue to tend to this tree moving forward. They'll get to decide how high or how low or where they want the growth to be. But essentially, as you remove things, and with the Akadama soil infusion, you'll allow for a lot of ramification to develop within the newly set branching. So at a very high level overview, that is basically the scope of work that we're going to undertake today. So thanks for being here. Excited to have you in your presence. Welcome from Austin, Texas. A big thanks to Roland for putting this together. And we've got Carlos and Brandon in the studio back there. So thanks for doing that. And we're excited to get started. So here we go, everybody. So we'll pop it out. Before we pop it out, we'll just do some basic trimming and cleaning of that. And then we'll take a look at the roots. Essentially what we're looking for here is we're just going to start at the base. And we're going to follow from the trunk line. We're just going to follow the first branch, and anywhere where there's like a piece of dead branching, we'll just kind of remove that in favor of the living branching. And then as we identify areas where there is an opportunity to reduce down to a bifurcation point, we will. So essentially on this branch, it's pretty straightforward. We won't be putting any wire on this tree today. We could be doing some more wiring to it, but essentially just really looking at introducing the root work as our main focus of effort here. So this branch has been mostly cleaned up. We'll move on to the next one. So as we go up in this direction, you can see there is a dead piece here. So we'll just kindly remove that with the scissors. Didn't even have to cut, just kind of broke it off. Same thing here, just kind of remove those things. And then right here at the tip, you can see where there's a piece of trifurcation. Essentially you have 1, 2, 3 different buds that are coming out of one spot. So we want to reduce this down to 2 in favor of setting up the future branch structure for this branch. As we continue to move up from this one joint up into the next one, we'll just keep following that same technique and process where just kind of reduce any dead things. As we move up in the hierarchy of branches, we essentially want to have the lowest branch be the longest, and then as we move up each increment, we kind of want it to kind of get the branching distance to come closer to the trunk line. So that's where towards the end here, we'll remove it in favor of creating kind of that balanced energy approach. So again, there's a moment here where we have 1, 2, 3 branches coming off. So we'll just continue to reduce down to 2. And then this node actually extends really long. So when we're looking at what compelling taper looks like, you can see that there's this one main flow of this branch. So this is like one thickness of taper here. And then it grows and has another thickness of taper that kind of extends out to this point. Then you have the tertiary taper, which is in this little region. So you go from thickest to thick to thin, which is excellent. You're looking for that. So wherever we have the opportunity just to kind of increase that proportionality of taper like that, we want to help find that favorable flow. So instead of going from thickest to thick, which extended out maybe an extra 2 or 3 inches, we're just going to cut that back to a single inch, and then now this lead will start taking off and being the lead for that branch development. So now we have more condensed taper within this branch to allow for a more compact and refined feeling for how that branch looks. We'll do that same thing on this other side here, just kind of cutting out that middle one to allow favorability and kind of keep all of this more condensed on this side of this branch here. Keep doing that same thing across the board until we get through the entirety of the tree. Let's see, so for this bigger piece here, we'll try to break off what we can and then maybe have to use a different tool to cut through that piece. Okay. And as we extend out to this, we're getting really far and distant from where these internodes are. So we're just going to keep cutting out the extended internodes to help increase the likelihood of some of these branches that have really long internoding to backbud. Like there's a tiny bud that's developed right here. So ideally that one grows out and extends and fill in this area, and then maybe this entire branch from where the scissor tips are out goes away in the future in favor of this one bud. But at this point in time, we don't know exactly where this branch is going to push out new buds. So we'll kind of leave it and we'll just reduce the tips of what's as far out as we can in order to help increase the likelihood of the strength flowing through the branches that are closer in. I also have some cut paste here. This is essentially gray duct paste or duct sealant that you can get at any of your big box retailers. So whenever you make a cut or damage some of the tissue in there where you can see like the green circle, that means you've exposed the cambium layer. And at this point in the year, since we're in winter, it is best for larger cuts like this to essentially take some of this duct sealant and then come through and just seal off those exposed cambium layers. And that'll help keep all of the moisture within the tree to stay in there. It won't dry out, and that cut site will heal over and have a healthier response whenever it's sealed like that. So just add a little bit of duct seal to help keep it healthy. Continuing to move up this branch structure here, we're getting really far out, so we're going to keep just reducing in favor. We're not trying to build too much ramification out in this area. We want the ramification to be closer into the trunk line here. So essentially we just keep reducing all of the trifurcation points where we can out farther away. So we've moved through this primary branch. So everything below these points has been addressed. So now we're going to continue to move up this main trunk line, and we can see it branches out this way. So one thing that we can do is take some pliers and essentially just grab a portion of the deadwood and just kind of let it snap off. You don't always have to make good clean cuts, especially whenever there's big chunky parts that might not heal up perfectly. We'll do some twisting just to give it kind of more of a natural, like broken feel to it. Like this piece up here, we can just basically use the pliers to peel that off and just do little natural breaks where we can instead of having like a flat cut there. And then that'll help with some of the gnarliness that it'll feel like it's bark. So I'm just doing a little bit of pinching, a little bit of twisting to help move any of the punky material away from the site in order to reduce that. It was a very flat piece. So in order to kind of make it look and feel a little bit more naturalistic, just kind of tear away at it like that. Okay, so continuing to move up this branch structure here. Do a slight cut on this one. And then honestly, I think this is very long from an internode standpoint. You're towards the apex of the tree. So when we're looking at the taper again, it flows, and this is the thickest, and that thick continues to extend in a very large straight line. So this is where these are like indicators and signs within the structure and the design of the tree. It says maybe we want to address that. I think if we were to remove this upper half of it, even though there is ramification up here, this branch will essentially grow and take off since it's now the new leader of this branch, and it'll flourish and have lots of strength to it. And then instead of developing something out here, you'd start developing some pads and foliage in this region and area, which then overall would bring the whole design down, unless we wanted it to be a taller tree, which I think for this specific one, we lose a lot of the interest in this region and in this region. So I'm thinking through removing, when we're looking at how to address the upper portion of this specific design, removing this thicker portion here, so that way you have that more dynamic transition of taper from thick to thick, or from thickest to thick, and then essentially we would adjust some of these areas. So with following that approach and strategy, we can essentially consider removing this section and then removing this section to help bring everything down. Let's see how that looks. So I'm using some concave cutters here. We'll just kind of clip away at this part like that. We'll leave a little bit of a nub there, like a little collar right below, above that internode part to let it heal over so we don't cause any damage to that little bud. And then we'll add another piece of the cut paste to just seal off that wound. It's like some sticky, sort of sticky material. It reminds me of like sticky tacky that we used to have. You'd stick stuff to the walls. So essentially, you just get a little bit of your tongue moisture and help seal that to the trunk there. Okay, so we've addressed these portions of it. So now moving up into this region. If we wanted to keep this tall height, we sure could. It is definitely kind of distracting from the overall height of the tree. But it does filling out some of the area here. So depending on what the person who is tending to this tree wants to do, they might keep that because it does kind of move back over to the design. But again, when we're thinking about that internoding, like we have a large volume of upper canopy, upper trunk line that is very straight and doesn't bend much. So it is a predicament. For today, what do you think, Roland? Cut it back hard, leave it taller? Yeah, we can take it incrementally and see what people think. So that's definitely too tall. So if we do another cut here, we break off this piece. Sometimes you just gotta kind of see what it looks like. Cut this one back. So I think we're gonna end up cutting it back. I feel like we can find a front that has this thinner branch leaning towards it. So then if that's where we make the cut, essentially, then we can have it leaning forward a little bit, make the cut on the backside to where you don't really notice that the cut is there because you won't see the surface cut. So essentially it'll be still moving towards you. Whenever you design a bonsai, you want the apex of the tree, which is going to be this branch here, leaning and embracing towards the viewer so that you feel like the tree is engaging you instead of the inverse, which would be as if it's falling out of the bonsai pod and leaning far away. So with that design principle in mind, as far as having the front of the tree going towards you, I feel pretty confident about removing this section of the top part here. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Big cut. All right. I'll just clean that up a little bit. Okay. Put some cut paste on there. Again, just a nice little thin layer of cut paste that you put on there. in order to help seal the wound, keep the moisture in there. And I used to put big giant blobs of cut paste on there, and then one day I saw and talked to Mike Lane, who recommended that you use a smaller cut paste layer, so that if there are any buds that want to pop out of that location, then essentially they have the capability to push through the cut paste and form a bud, which is ultimately what we're aiming for, is more growth. It's not sticking on there very well. Let me do a fresh piece. There's different types of cut paste, different styles. This kind of like putty stuff works pretty well in my mind, especially when you're just looking to seal it through the winter. I definitely think that the orange liquid cut paste does pretty well. Some of them actually have hormones in them that'll help the growth of the plant. So that's always cool if you can put on some sort of chemical that will essentially maybe increase the likelihood of growth. Then that's a perk. But for all intents and purposes, what we have added on here is very effective in just simply sealing that site to make sure that it stays healthy. So a little dabble there. This is a pretty big cut, but ideally this tree now has gone through all the big decision-making cuts that it needs, and it'll move into a full-on healing process as it continues its bonsai journey. Bonsai is definitely a long-term sport, so whenever you're thinking about decisions, you want to try to make decisions that are gonna benefit the tree on the long term, on the order of 10 to 20 years, instead of necessarily making decisions based on what it's gonna do and what it looks like right now in the present moment. The present moment is a superficial period that's definitely, there's a word for it. It's definitely ephemeral. It's going to always change. So the present moment appreciation of bonsai is the practice of working with the trees and spending the time to set it up for the future. Okay, so just a couple more little cuts and then we'll start working on the root work here. We got carried away on this one apex branch, so that was cool. We still need to address cut here at this site, and we'll make this apex come down a little bit more. And the word I was thinking of, and it eluded me for a very long time, was impermanence. So bonsai is very much, in my mind, a practice of impermanence. I will not be here one day, this tree will not be here one day, but finding that process and flow of what is here and appreciating it for the best that it can be is what we're really looking for. All right, so we just went through and basically trimmed up the tree. So I can step to the side a little bit. We can see what we're working with overall. We're going to start the repotting part of this. And I think we're going to aim at something in this region, kind of being the front. I definitely would look at cutting this piece back in the future and to continue to increase that. The apex and the competing apex from here are very much in competition. So just for today, I'll remove this one branch. But in the future, there might be more opportunities to like adjust where these two branches and how these two apex branches are interacting as we formulate the overall design. But this is a great start. We're setting up the bones and we've done a lot of reduction today. So we'll leave this as it is, and it'll be up to the next practitioner to determine where they want it to go beyond what we've set up. So now that we're done with the styling, we're going to move on to the root work. And that'll look like essentially taking it out of this container and starting to tease out some of that dirt. Onto the next large portion of this one. Just gonna gently slide it out of this container. Put it into this plastic bin. So when we're looking at doing repotting work, there's a couple tools that are pretty important. Definitely need your chopstick. So this is the only chopstick that I use primarily. It was a gift from Bonsai member Mike Garza. He made it out of a bamboo round a few years ago, and I have used it perpetually since then. Thank you, Mike. This is the best chopstick I will ever have. It used to be like this long, and then it's just continuously getting smaller. So maybe I'll learn how to make these one day. For now, this one, I keep finding it. So basically try to find where the top of the roots are. So as the trunk line starts here and moves down, somewhere in here we're going to find lateral roots, or roots that basically don't grow down. So we're trying to find stuff that grows out from the tree that then will be the top of the nebare. Whenever you find stuff that's in bonsai or like dirt like this, then it's usually been up potted at a nursery, at like a tree nursery or somewhere along those lines, that essentially just takes it out of the pot, puts it in a larger pot, throws more dirt on it, and they call it a day. So there's going to be a large amount of excessive soil on the top. So we're going to start at the top and just kind of remove the edges and see what we can uncover from a root perspective. So just kind of continue to just gently poke and find where the roots are willing to break apart from the soil. And just continue to kind of go around in a 360 and just keep loosening up different parts of the container. So you can see as you start to tease away the sides of the root ball, you start to see some fine rooting get exposed. If anything breaks off, just simply remove it from the mix, so that way we don't have any roots and dead roots that are put back into the soil. You want to try to remove all that so you don't have anything that dies in there and gives you anything that increases the risk of having something in the soil you don't want, like diseases or bacterias or pests or anything that wants to eat dying roots. We want living, healthy roots in our soil. So as you start to make some space towards the trunk, just keep on going lower and lower in the root ball, just teasing away little sides to see what we can find. It's like a scavenger hunt, or like a digging for treasure. So I really enjoy the practice of repotting trees. Probably it's like one of my more enjoyable states. You get to see the big transformation. You go from something that was in a plastic nursery container into something that's in a bonsai pot, and that transformation is the real magic. Slow and steady. There's no real rush on getting this done. Oftentimes with the nursery containers, you'll find that there are roots that are matted on the bottom. Let's see if we can get some light on that. So it's just a big flat root ball. With the plastic there, as the roots grow down, they will basically come to the end of the container, and essentially they'll start wrapping around, creating the classic winding and wrapping root system that we see so much. There's a couple ways that you can prevent that proactively. People have been using grow boxes. Wooden grow boxes help cultivate lateral roots instead of the black nursery pots. There are grow bags that people can grow in. So there's the fabric grow bags that essentially do air pruning to the root system, which means that as the roots grow and search for the more space to grow into, they'll hit the fabric mesh edge, and instead of hitting the edge and then going down, they'll hit the edge and then they'll start ramifying. So you essentially get what's called air pruning to help create more of a ramified root system. And as they say, so as above, so below. So if you have highly ramified roots, then it's going to help and increase the likelihood of highly ramified branching. So the soil is one of the most important parts of the bonsai practice and the bonsai tree. You want to have soil that allows for the water to flow through it so that you don't end up with too much water in the container, right? You want a little bit of the organic media in an APL mix, Akadama pumice lava mix. That's the Akadama. And in some other mixes, that's like the pine bark or the expanded clay. That'll allow for the nutrient retention or the organic media to be there. So you want to balance the ability to retain water and nutrients with the ability to let the water flow through, since you're in a containerized environment. And that balance all comes down to components. What are you putting in the soil? Everyone's got their own mixes. I think pure Akadama is a pretty solid mix for deciduous, and then for conifers, I find the Akadama pumice lava to be pretty much standard. Okay, so there's a nice transition from this trunk line down to a lateral root there. So that's one option for where we want to have our root base start. Another option is going to be at the same height. There's another piece that's coming laterally right here. So these are good lateral roots that we want to maybe start to cultivate and build a nebare off of. So we're going to keep working now more so from the bottom to see what we can uncover. There's a lot of dirt down here, so we'll started from the top. Now we're going to go from the bottom, see what we can uncover. It's a messy process, the root work. Yeah, there's a pretty big root.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, you can see there's like the base of the trunk. So as we're starting to go from the bottom, we can see there's a big cut down here, a large piece of, there's some old bark that's falling off, and there's this old trunk line here. So I get the sense that this was probably a cutting at one point, where this was a big branch that was growing off of a tree, and then essentially, yeah, you can see that great in camera too. You can definitely see where like that cutting died back, and then you started growing roots. So we're basically going to follow this trunk up and see how much of it we can get rid of, because that's all going to go away in order for the board to fit in it. This is definitely a cutting based on that knowledge right there. All right, time for the saw. So we'll get a little hand saw here. Essentially look to all right, so that is the size of the trunk at the base. A hot dog, basically, right? That's very large though for what's on the very bottom of this thing. So with that out of the way, we can keep going up there, and essentially that's where we're gonna drill the board to it. So I'm actually gonna have to make another cut. I just wanted to keep moving things out of the way. I'm gonna start cutting some of these roots out of there. Essentially just slowly gonna, all right, so I'll start cutting some of these roots out. So whenever I'm looking at cutting roots, kind of the approach that I'm taking is it's similar to what we were doing above. Wherever you find favorable taper, you continue to follow those lines. So whenever you have an option to cut back something that bifurcates, you want to cut back the thicker in favor of keeping the thinner roots, because that's how you grow more roots, is by reducing and removing things that are really thick. So on this specific root ball, out in this region here, we have something that's really long. Cool. So whenever I take the longest part of that root and just kind of follow that back in to see where it genesis is from the trunk line, I'll basically come through and remove that thick piece. So removing the thicker in favor of keeping some of the thinner roots in place. I'm gonna keep trying to get all this soil out of here so we can comb all the roots out like hair. And then essentially we'll want to lay them flat on the board. So it is pretty important that we get as much of this dirt out of there as we can. You definitely want to do root pruning in the winter time. It's a little bit early in Austin, in my opinion, to do a whole bunch of root work, but we'll supplement and mitigate the concern there by putting this in a greenhouse until basically the end of February. But yeah, for the deciduous trees, you only do the root work whenever they're dormant. There was no leaves on this tree when I started, so that's how you know this one's dormant. And then you can do that root work basically anytime when it is dormant, just keeping in mind that all these new roots are going to be put into soil and they're susceptible to freezing and getting a lot of damage from the frost. So you essentially just need to make sure that you're not having it freeze. That's the main concern with doing root work too early, is there's still a lot of dates where there are freezes. The best time to repot a deciduous tree is right when the buds are starting to swell. Right before they swell and they get nice and fat, before they start doing bud break, is exactly when you want to be doing the repot. You can, or like a Yamadori even, you can go out into the wild and find the moment right before a cedar elm has green bud break, and you can basically dig that thing up, have no roots on it at all, no fine roots on it at all, put it in the right soil with the right aftercare. That thing will not skip a beat. It'll just push out leaves and then be like, what's up? I'm here. I'm awake in a bonsai pot. Cool. Let's grow. It's really cool. Just still trying to make sure I can get all the roots kind of combed out. There's plenty of roots here, lots of fine roots, so I'm not worried about any long-term effects. It'll definitely pull through this repot, as there are lots of fine roots in there. So we're starting to get close to where we can make heads or tails of what's going on at the base of the trunk and where we want to have our Nabari go. It was really cool to dig in there and see that this was a cutting, and then we can start to see where we want the Nabari to show up. Looks like there's that one piece that we saw jutting out this direction. There might be something underneath it. If we cut back, we can maybe get something a little bit lower. Essentially, we're going to have to do one more of those cuts. Yeah, so when we get up in this area, we can see where that old cut line stops. You can see right in, let me try to get there. You can see right in here that this is all dead old trunk from where the cutting existed, and now you start to see where the roots start to split off. So with that board approach that we're going to take on here, we need to be able to get that board as flat as possible. So we're going to do one more cut with the handsaw. I'm going to trim back some of these things as well that are growing down. Okay, let's see. Perfect. Just another little chunker of dead wood that's hanging out on the bottom. So now we've got a really flat base. This thing can sit on a board really well, like this. And then we can start pulling out some of these roots that go sideways. So again, I'm going to look at the bottom. Anything that's growing like real close straight down, I'm going to cut those in favor of the board. And everything else is just going to get nice and flat. Just trying to make some space for that board. Yeah, so we have a nice flat root spread that we're trying to cultivate here. And when we put it flat on my hand, essentially you can start to see where that Nebari shows off. It was totally under the soil line. And then you can see where we're going to have the Nebari transition into these like 3 or 4 regions. So it'll be really cool to start to have the base start to swell up and match sort of the sprawl of the canopy. And I think this board technique is going to be perfect for it. So let's give it a whirl. Roland, if you wouldn't mind giving me a hand on this so that way we can nail it down perfectly. I'll just hold these things like if you hold here. So nothing too magical. I'm just going to use your everyday screw that you find at the like a plank or a deck screw. And I have an impact driver here, so we're just going to basically... Ooh, I would have missed. I'm going to line them up as best as we can. And voila! Your board and your tree are now stuck together. So you can see we put the screw right in the middle of it. There are holes within the board as well to allow for drainage to go through, as well as to allow for us to tie the board down to the container. Since we won't have to tie the roots down, we can just tie the board down. And essentially, yeah, that's the magic of the Ebihara technique. Depending on what container you're going for, you could opt to have like a wider board. For us today, we've selected out this lovely blue ceramic container. There's nothing too magical about it other than it's nice and blue, and it is a bonsai pot. So these will be nice pairings here. Essentially, this will fit like that. All right, we're done. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice night. I'm just playing around. We're gonna definitely, so Roland has gone ahead and put down the tie down screens. And before we put these two together, I'm gonna do a little bit of the root guidance that I was describing. So back to it. All right, so now that we've cleaned up a little bit, we've got a nice root spread here. We're gonna continue to try to find and cut roots that are growing straight up so we can essentially define the top line of that Nebari where we can. As an example, this root kind of goes over the top, so maybe that whole thing could go away, but I don't know if there's anything lower than that I'd want to try to cultivate for the Nebari. But this root all needs to move, since it's on the top, it needs to move over to this direction. And this root that's underneath it, we can try to have move over to the left a little bit. But I'm wanting to move this one root right here over. Cool. So I'm wanting to move this over and out of the way of this root above it. So in doing so, I'll take a small framing nail and slide it over as much as it will tolerate without breaking, and then just put a small nail right there. Now that root has directionally moved over. And take this other piece that was growing up, and we'll essentially cut the things underneath it. We can nail it down over here. So now essentially where that root was going, it was moving this direction and up. We've moved it this way and moved it down. So now we're basically going in and micromanaging and positioning the roots exactly where we want them to be. So you'll do that in a complete radius around the tree in favor of positioning the roots where you feel like they need to go. And as we find roots that are still on the top, we can continue to remove those in favor of what could be below. You can also clip things that are still a little bit long. So for this root up above it, this root on top here, it is essentially something I think we want to remove for the one right below it. So in this one scenario, you have two roots that are going in the same direction. So we'll just clip the one on top, remove that, and now we're giving favor to these ones below it. And they're kind of competing, these two here. So we can either remove the one below and then nail this one down, or we can try to position them in different parts. So let's just use two nails. One will have this bottom root go towards the right, and then the top one will have go towards the left, and we'll fill in these spots. Yep, so now we've positioned 3 roots in a radial pattern. Now we have this large root that has a nice transition into the nabari and trunk. I'm going to remove some of the excessive length. And we want this to kind of go down where we can. I'm going to keep removing stuff underneath on the bottom. Any competing stuff on this side. And if you guys need me to pivot, just let me know. I can pivot and try something else from a shot side. So ideally get this one root here to kind of grow down is what we're aiming for. It might be hard to do with this specific. You know what? We could honestly remove it entirely in favor of the one below it, but I feel like that might be a lot of damage right at that one critical spot to heal over. So you could cut that back. It's probably the size of a pencil wound that would take a while to heal. So we'll leave that there. I am going to try to put a nail to let it pull down though, so it's not growing out and it's growing more down. Let's see how that looks and how that works. Yeah, I'm not sure I can pull it off with these nails in this situation here. Okay, so I guess what I would want to do is basically guy wire that and try to pull it in tight. We'll leave that for today. Just gonna trim it a little bit. Okay. We'll position one of these out here though to keep it going away from the other pieces. Okay, so we're kind of having this one stay over this direction towards my right-hand side, and then continuing on the other half of the tree, continuing to tease out any remaining potting soil. If I was at the studio, we definitely would have given this a quick wash in the sink, get rid of any of that excessive dirt. And then I think we can take this root and kind of move it away from the other ones as well. So it bifurcates, so we can put a nail in each of these bifurcation roots. So take one nail and, yeah, Roland, do you want to give me a quick hand just to nail this down properly? So what you'll want to do is just put pressure right there, if you can hold that down. Okay. Yep. Okay, good, yep. So now that root is bending this way. So I bent this root was moving in this direction, so now we moved it this way. And then what I'll actually do is take the extended part of that and I'll bend it the other way and then put a nail in that. And then for the bifurcation piece that I'm trying to have separation from, I will move it in the other direction with two nails as well. I'm trying to create motion, create separation and distance between the roots, so that way as they grow, they're following the path, they're following the separation that you design, and with them being flat against that board, they're going to grow out and swell up towards the top of the soil line. So that's exactly what we're aiming for. I'm going to keep trying to tap any dirt away. A pro tip that you'll learn from reading the internet is to not use plywood. Essentially, plywood doesn't last very long when it comes to the bottom board. So if you use plywood, you'll end up having the plywood decompose and causing some of those root conditions that we're talking about, like keeping dead roots in there. So you want to try to avoid the plywood. And there's a pretty thick clumping of roots underneath this one. So I feel like we can take the top one off since it's not super thick and just continue to peel away and see what's underneath there. There's a whole bunch of really fine roots in this region, which leads me to believe it wants to grow a lot from here. It's a really thick one at the very bottom that I just removed, about that thick. So that was like underneath the things, and potentially this could have been a good candidate for being the one that we cut back to if that big thick piece extended. Instead it branched off and has like a little dead desiccated spot. So we'll remove that. And we'll ideally remove enough to get down to the bifurcation. So you want only two major roots to be growing from this spot. Again, pulled something from the bottom. And now that we can see what we're working with a little bit more, this one's not a very pretty root. Okay, so now we have less options, which is helpful. There's another big thick one on the bottom. And then out of these, we'll want to position this one over this, the far left one on the far left side where it's wanting to go naturally. And then there's a ton of just little fibrous ones that I'm going to kind of reduce back selectively. I'm going to keep some roots on this tree so that it stays alive. Okay, so we'll start nailing some of these down. Yikes. Oh my. There we go. Okay, and one for these bunches, which seems like a lot in one. Okay. I'll nail this one down. Okay, and then we just have a few more as we continue to go around the circumference. We'll nail this one down. All right, so we're working through our way around the board here. Keep getting all that extra soil out wherever it's willing to separate. And we just have these two roots in this region. Let's see. Sorry, maybe this third of the tree left. We're going to keep doing the same process where we're finding from the trunk line down into the root system, there are two roots that are stacked on top of each other. So for this one, we're going to remove the thin one in favor of the thick one because we're trying to cultivate the Nebari. So we're really looking at, what's that transition from the thick to the trunk. If we're out here towards the bifurcation spots, we remove the thicker in favor of the thinner. But right where the trunk line and the root touch is where we really want to be aware of the size. If we cut the thick one back, sometimes you'll end up basically just leaving more root damage like we were thinking about on the other side to heal over. Okay, we'll nail this one out farther away from everything. Just a few more roots here. All right, so we'll come through and cut the stuff underneath on this next one. Look at these guys, they're all over the place. Let's get you lined up. Put you into some positioning here. Let's probably go out to that nail. Cool. Let's nail this one down. Get rid of some of these extra roots. All right. And then lastly, we have this mess of roots over here. I'm gonna clip some of this stuff from the top. It's almost the one that we could like remove, but then there's like a pretty big scar there to heal over. It isn't very pretty though. And the base right below it is pretty rad. So that's a tough one. We're gonna leave it for today, but I do believe that this root that's sitting up here at the top could be removed in favor of what's beneath it. But for today, we'll leave it. And that can be a decision that gets made in the future. I feel like I've removed a lot of roots today. I'm excited to get this one into the pot. Okay, just these last three. Just kind of space them out evenly. Okay, one more nail, and we are set. All right, so now we have distributed all of the roots where we want them for this tree. So that'll help cultivate the nabari and set directionality for the roots. And we'll put that into a bonsai pot next. Awesome. So back at it. We're gonna do the potting process now that we got all of the roots organized and aligned. So for the repotting here, essentially gonna create some tie-down wires. Add some tie-down wires to the bottom. I use stainless steel tie-down wires. It's pretty tough and resistant metal, but I find it works really well compared to copper, which is expensive, and then compared to aluminum, which kind of has a tendency when you're pinching the wire down to break. It also stretches as the aluminum kind of just like expands and isn't as strong of a metal as steel. This stainless steel kind of tie-down wire is real strong. It is a bit of a pain though.
You say it's cheaper?
It is not as cheap as aluminum, but cheaper than copper.
Okay.
So you get it at like any of your box retailers. So want to make sure that you get the, what was it, the stuff that's like actually annealed? No, colored, copper coated?
Oh, for copper?
No, for the stainless steel stuff. You have to get the stuff that's like,
Oh.
because you got stuff that rusted, right?
Yeah. You want to get,
It's okay. Impermanence. That was the word of the day that eluded me earlier. So you want to get the stuff that is like galvanized, maybe?
There you go. That's
Galvanized stainless steel. Okay, so for this one, usually I do for doing tie downs, I usually do a 5-point Kathy Shaner tie down. Since we're using the board, we're just going to use 4 points, and then we'll feed it through some of these holes as we place it in there. First and foremost, I think it's going to sit a little bit low if we put it flush. So I'd like for it to sit up a little bit. So we're going to put in a little bit of some pumice here. So this is basically just sifted pumice that we'll use as a drainage layer in the very bottom. And then I have, nicely sifted clearly. Then I have some bonsai mix here. This is essentially APL, Akadama pumice and lava mixed together. So we'll put some of that above the pumice. And we'll place the board on that. And we'll tie it down. Just getting a nice even distribution. A little bit of grow media on top of the pumice there. Then we'll place it. We're not going to get the best front today due to how the board fits in here. But know that this is just a temporary position. So what will happen is the roots will go out and then they'll grow underneath. So in the future, you can just pop it out and then cut around the board, and then all the other roots can go away. And then you're basically good to repot it from there. Can I drill another hole through there? There it is. Just work all of the wire through so it slides on nice and easy. Come on with it. There we go. Then we'll do a little bit of a tie down there. So I'll cross the wires and then basically just cinch them by twisting them together, and that creates a nice tight seal. Cut all the extra, which was a lot. Same thing on the other side. A couple twists, cut the extra. And cinch it. So I get right at the point where the wires cross, and I pull up and then twist. And as I pull up, I'm getting all the slack and then moving that into the twist. Okay, so now it's tied down. We'll just take the soil and just lightly go around the edge of the container here to fill it in. Get some chopsticks out, do our favorite chopstick action on it. The pokey poke. Chopsticks somewhere around here. I see it. Yeah, thanks. It's one area of demoing that you get kind of used to, is like, put your tools in places where you'll find them. I've had some really early demos where I'm just like struggling, like, where's the tool? Oh no, where's the thing I need? Oh, it's in your ponytail. Nice. Yep, so I'm just kind of pushing any roots that are popping up down and going for any spaces where there's essentially a hole or a gap, and just pushing the Akadama pumice and lava into those holes, trying to move it around. We know that there is a flat thing underneath it, so we won't get to the very bottom of it. and just fill it up, and this thing will grow for a couple, 2 or 3 years in this bonsai container. It'll develop nice ramification for the branches and the roots. This thing is thirsty though. I feel it. It's like woo, nice and dusty. My dry roots love this dusty soil. It's really important that you take the time to chopstick through. The less air pockets that you have, and the more soil is compact and dense in there, it really helps with the cultivation of the healthiness. You're trying to have a nice balance of air and water, aka oxygen and water within the soil, so that it can 1, breathe, and 2, dry out. So part of that cultivation comes from making sure that you put all of the soil in there and then compacting it down so that there's no pockets of air. It's as dense as you can. Okay, so we'll give that a water and then add a little bit of moss on top for some coloring, but in a nutshell, that is what we're aiming for. You have the front of the tree is kind of in this region, so we're cattywampus from how it's need to be presented in the container, but simultaneously we've set the roots up for a really healthy Nibari cultivation. We've set the top up to redistribute and grow new branching and ramification. It's in really quality soil for bonsai, and it's in a bonsai pot, so definitely we can appreciate the tree maybe from this front for a little bit, knowing that it breaks some rules, it's leaning backwards, or we can just appreciate it for as it is. Theoretically, we could have looked at using a board, using a larger container to get to the perfect front for this tree, but it is, in my mind, all about the iterative process and applying the best technique you can at that moment. So without further ado, thank you and enjoy.